You're good to go. Oh, actually, wait, let me start the recording. Our look.
Recording in progress.
Great. Okay, it's 5:03 on the 24th of May. I'd like to call to order the regular board meeting of the Oregon City Library. In attendance are myself, Cynthia Andrews, Nick Dirkman on Zoom, Larry Osborne, Heidi Blackwell, Bill Carton, and our newest board member, Lisa Oreskovich. Greg Williams and Denise Butcher, the staff, are in attendance. First, I want to start with congratulating Heidi for her successful school board election. We are very pleased.
Forward to the connection between
Yeah.
strengthening connection to the library and
Great.
district.
And then we have a little bit of cleanup to do, and we apologize for the fact that there are 10 mostly work sessions, and we can do this in one motion. If anybody, anything in any of those that you have corrections or objections or anything else, please speak up now. If not, I'd entertain a motion to accept the work sessions of 1:13:21, 9:8:21, 1:12:22, 7:8:24, 22, 11:30:22, 3:22:23, and the two regular sessions, 1:12:22, and our recent session, 4:25:23. So second, please.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're clean.
All right, we do apologize from the staff. We do apologize for falling behind on those. I think we discovered just a tiny little hole in our workflow process, which I believe we have corrected now. So that should not happen. It was for some reason we just didn't do minutes for the work sessions. So we do apologize for that.
I have to thank you for all that work, because before I applied to be on the board, I went through, 20 hours of videos. This saved me another 20 hours
well,
of
good.
catching up.
Well,
It was a microcosm of COVID and the rest.
Yeah.
Fascinating
Yeah.
history.
And there are other advisory bodies in the city who are going through the same process, because some of us, we discovered some holes. I was telling our chair, and for some of the newer folks, one of the things I'm very proud of our library staff did during COVID, we had our on-calls. They did a whole bunch of minutes for committees. So a lot of those minutes that you see posted that going back years and years and years, those were actually library staff members who watched those videos, typed up those minutes.
Oh,
nice.
So
So it wasn't AI doing voice.
no, it was allies. I so, but yes, we apologize for falling behind.
Right. All right, director's report, please.
Okay, I don't have a lot to say. If anybody has any questions about anything I sent out for the director's report, please let me know. The only thing that I wanted to address on the statistics in particular was, the thing that jumped out at me a little bit was our hold to borrow ratio went in the wrong direction a little bit this month. That I can say with 99.9% confidence was a staffing issue. So we were down an adult services librarian for that period. Also, while recruiting, all of our collection development came down to one adult services librarian with an assist from Denise, helping catch up on those things. But now that we're fully staffed on that, we should be able to catch back up. And I anticipate going forward, our ratios will start to get towards that even 50-50 that we like to see.
Which is quite astonishing, considering we have the smallest collection in the state.
I always think that's the thing.
That is, and I'm very pleased, that is something I like to point out is, yes, even with a very small collection, our selectors do a really good job of selecting materials, and our circulation is definitely not, bottom of the state. So
Pardon me, can you tell, or do you just know of the holds sent to other libraries? Are they relatively new acquisitions or things that are in inventory?
So in general, I can tell you in general, when I've looked at it, a lot of it is new stuff. You know, that's a lot of what goes out. There are some things that are in, you know, there are things that we don't necessarily have in our inventory here that we pull from other libraries, and vice versa. To a degree, that's fine. That's some of the beauty of being in a cooperative, is that not every library has to spend the money to have a copy of every book, right? So we can share. But what we want to start doing a better job of, and this is one of the things I talked with our new adult services librarian about, is we want to look at that data on a, you know, on a more regular basis and kind of see, okay, of the things that we're bringing in to fill holes, you know, if we see, you know, the things like that, and then we say, oh, nonfiction, you know, in the 200s, which is philosophy and religion, I'm just guessing. If we see a spike there, you know, that we're bringing in a lot more than we're sending out, that's a signal to us, oh, that's a part of the collection that we should really look at. That, you know, maybe we don't have enough to satisfy, you know, the normal amount of demand. So we are going to start to look at that a little more closely. I have a report that I put together that separates it out by call number at this point, and we can try to get more. Yes.
Okay, anybody have any questions, Greg? Denise? Nick, anything?
Nope.
Okay, good. Any public comments, Denise?
No.
Okay. The next item is the budget results, and why don't I speak for a few minutes and then Greg, you can fill in. Greg and I and Denise were part of it. She wasn't feeling well, but part of it sat through 3 grueling sessions of the city budget committee. And frankly, I found it open, welcoming, fair, little bit of craziness in the process of people that have very strong views about taxation and whatnot. We went in with a budget that was proposed that would have given us, I think, a $38,000 net from the city general fund. And that was down considerably from the previous biennium and way down from 5 bienniums. And Greg put together this fabulous report that showed the slope of decreasing support from the city, which he and I both presented. And frankly, we got something. We went in with 38,000. We came out with 158,000. So we changed. The trend has been changed. They listened to what the effect of that decrease in funding was. You know, how did you survive through that kind of funding? I said, well, our collection is very small, and we've got part-time people that are unbenefited that we have real difficulties with. And they heard it, and they interacted very well. They got a few things wrong that we've straightened out in the last day. But we were one of only about 5 additions to the city manager's budget, and that he's going to find somewhere in the general fund. So we've got 60,000 a year for the next 5 years. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Denise, for the work that you did. It was a success. Any other?
No, well, first I want to thank David, Chair Goldberg, for coming to every one of those meetings, and for advocating. I want to thank Heidi for coming to the first meeting. And I mean, everybody who came, you know, we've got our role as staff members, you know, when presenting the budget and talking to the budget committee, and you've got your role as advisory board members and members of the community. And you know, I think presenting both those perspectives was helpful. I was encouraged by the conversations, you know, that were had throughout this process. I think I'm feeling good about the notion that there will be a little more understanding that, yeah, you know, we like every other department, the library deserves attention, and we've got to take a look at these things, and we've got to kind of think about, you know, what the future looks like and how we're doing what we're doing, and hopefully we will be able to have more of those conversations in the future. Like David said, we did get an additional 60,000. I do want to let the library board know, when presented to the budget committee, the way it was presented to the budget committee was that would be equivalent to another full-time library assistant 2 position, so a fully benefited library assistant 2. That 60,000 figure does factor in backing off on some of our on-call spending, you know, so it's a net amount of, you know, a fully loaded LA2 is about $108,000. You know, if you back off an equivalent 1.0 in on-calls, it's about 40,000. I did mention the city manager, and I just want to make sure this library board knows. As with all of these positions that we're trying to recharacterize from unbenefited to benefited, we also have people, here, people who have given their hearts and souls and worked for us for a long time. So, I told Tony, my one concern is that, because we have these positions, I don't want the expectation to be that on July 1st, we jettison, a whole bunch of people who have worked for us and then we start these new positions. So it will be, a process, right? So we'll go through it, we'll make this work, and as much as possible, try to take advantage of attrition in our own calls and just try to make sure that we're being fair and equitable to all of the staff members.
As a follow-up to this, a couple of things are going to happen. One thing that was very apparent to me as a community member is that the staff, whether it's Greg or whether it was some other city managers of departments, are in an untenable position. I mean, he has negotiated with the city manager to come up with the budget that the city manager submitted, but we found inadequate. And so we advocated for a change in that, but he's caught in the middle of it. And there were literally moments where the mayor was calling him up to the table and the city manager was pushing him back to his feet.
The city manager was not pushing me back. He did not say not to come. I want to make it clear. At no point did Tony tell me not to come up or anything like that, but I was,
It was very awkward.
it was, I wanted Tony to be the one to invite me, right? That his role is as budget officer for the city, and it's his role and his responsibility to present the budget to the budget committee. And when questions are asked of the budget committee, it's, he decides, who's going to answer and how it's going to answer. And so I wanted to be very respectful of that. So I had nothing against Tony. I thought, like you, I thought Tony did a masterful and wonderful job of navigating us through this.
And subsequently, I've been in touch with Tony about wanting to really not surprise him in the future and not sort of have this scenario play out again, and that we meet quarterly, Greg and I and Tony sit down quarterly. He's committed to doing that. So I find him a gentleman and reasonable, but there was an awkwardness that clearly was there. The other thing that I'd like to do, and I just want the blessing of the board, is go to the next commission meeting, which is June 7th. And raise 3 points. One, I want to congratulate them on a really well-run process where people felt welcome and the community. It was really a good example of democracy in action. And secondly, to thank them for recognizing that there was a trend that was not very positive for the library and that's been turned around. And third, to say that we really don't expect that the general fund of Oregon City is going to solve the library's fiscal problems by itself going into the future, particularly 6 years down the future when the surplus in our library fund will have been used up. And that we will likely need their support for a new bond measure at some time in the next several years. And we'll hear more about that from Nick as we get the LDAC meeting. And so I'm going to go to and just to sensitize them that we don't want to surprise them. This is likely to be coming, and we're going to be as transparent as we can in the process. So any questions about what happened?
Was that awkwardness like a sidebar discussion, or was it?
No, it wasn't so much that.
Time for testimony from Greg.
The testimony from Greg was not invited. Yeah, I mean, testimony, I mean, I
Not on the agenda.
No, the city, it was the city manager's budget, and so it was
Yes.
he and the finance director that answered 90% of the questions from the existing budget. And see, I raised the issue, Greg had done a lot of the background work for that, but I raised the issue in my testimony. I testified twice and was ready to go a third time, and engaged with the members of the budget committee and explained some of the things which ultimately they got. It took a few meetings. Yeah, it's built, the awkwardness is built in. It's not the personalities of these people. It's just the dynamic of having an outside board that he's accountable to and a city manager who's his boss, who submits the budget. So it's just sort of.
That was my fault for only watching a third of the meeting. And then my eyes glazed.
That's a very rational decision.
I was at the meetings and I think I only watched the 30-minute transcript. Okay, so we've done pretty well with that.
Yeah, and were there any questions? Did anybody have any questions?
All right.
And sorry, I just want to thank you all for, like we said before, this is the first time we've did this budget process with the library board. I felt really good about it. I really appreciated the engagement. I think everybody knows I like to talk through things. And so having a bunch, having you all there to help talk through those things and to help look at it was really helpful for us. And thank you.
All right, communications. Nick, you want to start with LDAC?
Sure. So we met last week, and the LDAC meeting we started out pretty much the same as we had the meeting before that, but part of in terms of all the members and their sort of position on some of the key topics that we've had open for as long as I've been on LDAC, around use of funds and just the issues around chargebacks and all those kind of things. So that discussion went on, but we have something from the LDAC that has to go to the board of county commissioners, and that is the annual reports, the two that we did that got finalized fairly recently. Those have to go to the board, and the decision was made to put a cover letter on it, which the chair of LDAC is going to put together a draft. But part of that is around the fact that there is a real difference of opinion within LDAC. I think if we took a vote, that we probably would have that LDAC with a vote would have probably supported more what we've what Oregon City has had. We've had two key topics that have come up continuously, and that one is use of funds for bond measure for the bond. Then the other one is just the amount of reserves that we have. And I think other city libraries like Happy Valley, they have a fairly large reserve, so they would probably be in support of sort of our position on it. And then I think there's sort of two ends, and then sort of the middle group that they're looking at it from the standpoint that these things probably don't affect them as much. But so it was an interesting discussion, and Commissioner Savas was there, and he gave some really good input in terms of some of the history, and I think that was really helpful to get that back on the table again. He has brought it up several times that the original intent was not to make it so that it was restricted as much as the perception is by some of the members of LDAC in terms of use of funds, particularly around building and that type of thing, capital expenditures and that type of thing. So we'll have to see how the letter comes together. But that was a key discussion. Any questions about that aspect of it? And Greg, please add to it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think you covered. I guess the things I think would be helpful for Nick and myself, going back there at the next meeting, like Nick said, Commissioner Savas, I'll go back a little in history. So I think we've talked about some of the people who've been on this board for a while knew that the county had put together the idea of a task force to look at some of the issues that are facing the library district. And one of the impetuses for that task force was the county's attempt in 2018, I believe it was, to change the master order. So the county had a proposal that they were going to bring up that said we were going to change the master order to explicitly permit library district dollars to be used for capital purposes. And there was such an outcry at the time that the county commission said, okay, we're not going to do this. You need to get together in a task force and kind of tell us what the way forward is. And then COVID hit and the task force never happened. And the task force was going to look at more than just that particular issue. It's going to look at a lot of things. So now fast forward to where we are now, and Commissioner Savas, I thought Commissioner Savas did a really good job of reminding the group that this is where we were back then, but times are very different and times change, and it's probably good to relook at this anew. And he did kind of a straw poll around the room of, he said, and Nick, correct me if I'm misremembering, but he basically said, if we felt that we had support from LDAC, we could get the master order changed in 60 days. And do it. And so I guess the one question I would have for this body to provide Nick with some feedback that he can take to a next LDAC meeting is if that discussion comes up again, would this library board support, the county going ahead and changing the master order to explicitly allow the use of district dollars for capital funds? Because that has been something that's been very controversial in the past. So,
my sense of this is that this is a silly issue. The reason I say that is that capital funding for a building, for a library building. One, it supports the library. So it's funding of having the library available. It's a silly issue. But secondly, if in fact this got litigated and the city was forced to not use this money, what they could do is just say, okay, we're not going to use the money for bond, but now we're going to charge rent, and rent is an operating expense. So it's this circular nonsense that somebody's got a bug in a part of their body that is irritating them and is making a big deal of something that I just don't think is a big deal. But so I certainly support, if that helps in any way, to move this along. I'm much more interested in the longer term than in looking historically at these small issues. But
I agree with what you're saying, David. I'm hoping that we don't have to take the time to try to get that through, because it's going to take a lot of work. Even though it can be done in a short period of time, that means all the cities have to agree to that master agreement change. I think that's a lot to go through.
That should just be the county commission. They could do that themselves.
They can do that.
The master order.
The master agreement. That's right. It's the IGAs that would have to be changed.
The IGA that would have to be
correct.
Cities. That's why Commissioner Savas was pretty.
Yes, you're right.
Hey, we can turn this around really quick.
But again, it's one of the points I made was the fact that we have a lot of things that are in place, and for any of the cities to change what has happened over the last years would be very difficult to unravel. Like when we went out for the bond measure and all those kind of things. It had implications across the board with some of these things. But I don't know how critical that would be for us to get that done. But the other thing that came out of the meeting was there's a subcommittee that was set up to take the original proposal for the large task group and to come up with trying to come up with a way to navigate forward and to see what we can do to go out for perhaps another, it's not really a bond measure, but a new district basically that would set a new rate. Because the district right now, we can't really just change the rate. We have to go out for another measure that would allow us to set up a new district that would include an increase in the rates. And that committee is a 4-person committee, and I'm one of the members of that committee.
Well, I'm very interested in looking forward to to getting something in front of the voters in the next couple of years, if possible, and that's going to involve getting every city manager and every city commission to agree. I think it's doable. I don't think it's that outrageous a process, but it is a process, and it's going to take a lot of work on some people, and I'm certainly committed to working toward that. So
yeah, I think the reason. Part of the big task force was to get that buy-in along the way. So part of, it's going to take a new strategy in terms of how to get the cities involved in order to get anything, approved going forward.
Yep.
The other part of that about the reserves and our library fund, in a sense, we can say, you're right, we've solved that. we're spending it down to what is required in conservative budgeting, which is what 52% of our operating revenue. And the reason for that, for those of you that not aware, is that we do not get the tax money from the county for the library district until January. From July till January, we've got mostly personnel expenses. That's the bulk of our expenses that have to be paid from some source. And so that's the purpose of having a library fund, in order to float, basically to float the money to pay staff until the money comes in July. But we've got way more than that. And Greg has put together a budget that we wanted a 10-year, but we've got 6 years where we will take money from the library fund to fund operations until we get to that 52%, which happens at the end of the 6 years. So
I mean, just to point out that that's just the fact that when the taxes are collected, because our bills are due in November, and that's not unique to the library district. That's across the board. Any, like the general fund for the city basically works the same way.
exactly.
You have to gather the money before it's distributed.
But
So you always have to have a reserve. You have to have a reserve to cover that at the beginning.
businesses often go out and borrow money to cover payroll until Christmas time.
Right.
I mean, it's just very similar phenomenon. So
I mean, if our fiscal year was different, it would be, it would look different on paper.
right.
Yeah,
That's true.
it would be interesting if we had a February fiscal year, because we get the money right away, but.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else about LDAC or any questions?
Well, mine was just more about the county budget is a very hot topic right now. What impact does that have for us more locally here, our library district?
So this time, I'm sorry, do you mind if I take that, Nick?
Go ahead.
Okay. And so when the district was formed, the agreement was between the county and the cities is that cities, you go out for a district that's all that money is going to go to you, to run your libraries. The county's commitment to support was we will run the centralized network office that provides all the courier service, the computer systems, and a lot of different services that help us operate as a library cooperative.
What's the annual scale?
It's very similar to ours. When I was there running it, it was about a $2.5 million a year operation. It's probably closer to 30 now. Some of the interesting things about that is, they got trucks. So, there's always capital reserves that need to be held, for purchasing new trucks. The trend, when I was there, and the trend in the subsequent years is we used to also have a lot of reserve for networking equipment, computer servers and the like, and along with everybody else, so much of it is moving to the cloud now, which is good. That makes it easier to manage, and there's fewer capital requirements. And then the county network also just put in. There was an agreement when we first went to RFID that in exchange for libraries taking on some operational costs, that the county would start to reserve some money to help us when it came time to replace all of our self-checks. So there is a reserve for that. So that's all paid out of the county fund. And so for years, that's kind of worked, and there's an agreement in place about how much that would increase every year. And there's an IGA between the county and the cities, which says, here are the services that the library network will provide. Anything above and beyond that, libraries have to pay for themselves. And that's worked pretty well over the years. This year, I can freely say all this, I'm not a county employee. So the courthouse has thrown all of that into not just the network office. Every single general funded department has been asked at some point or another to make cuts, because my understanding is the county does not want to. They know that if they go out to voters to pass a bond measure to build the courthouse, it will fail. And they got some matching funds from the state, and so they don't want to lose access to those matching funds. So they're doing everything they can to figure out how to build a courthouse. So lots of general fund departments were asked to cut. over the past couple of months, there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the library network office would be asked to cut. And it's gone like this, right? You know, and it's been kind of a roller coaster. The last information that Rick, the current network manager office, gave at the LDAC meeting was that there are no cuts in this budget to the library network office that are going to result in an immediate impact to libraries. Now, poor Rick has to say that way. I will read between the lines on Rick's behalf. That was this year. That does not mean that he didn't get budget cuts. So I know I believe that Rick, like every manager who was asked to do that, went through his budget and tried to identify places that he could make cuts without having the adverse effect on his customers. So I believe he was probably asked to cut back a little bit. I am concerned, as are all the library directors, about future years, because as I pointed out at the LDAC meeting, every cut to the library network office is really an additional cost on libraries out of our already scarce operating funds. You know, so one of the things that was sort of talked about this year was cutting Sunday courier service, which is a huge service impact for our patrons, every library patron, and really that volume has to be made up during the course of the week. So that just means more on us during the rest of the week to try to keep up with our circulation. Thankfully, that did not come to pass this year, but I would say all the library directors are concerned what's going to happen in future years. Because the general fund, you know, everybody's general fund is challenged and it's not getting any better for any of us. And so one of the things we talked about when we were kind of talking about our LDAC chairman around the room, and, you know, what do you think about, you know, certain things? And I was fairly vociferous in saying when I personally conceive of a new library district, it is one that has a rate that is sufficient to fund libraries' operational needs, library capital reserve needs, and also sufficient to fund the central network office and get them out of being dependent on county general funds, because we can't have a strong, stable cooperative if our central office funding is constantly at risk. And that seemed, Nick, I think that resonated with a lot of the people.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with it in general. I mean, it's always confusing. Being on the budget committee for the library district, I mean, it's even the commissioners don't understand why they're considering two different budgets that relate to the library operations, I should say.
Plus they operate a library.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, but I shouldn't say none of. I don't know how much, the intent was never for the county general fund to fund those Oak Lodge and Gladstone, right? It's supposed to be done out of different financing sources. The county's original conception was the only general fund dollars they'd be spending on library services was to the network office. But that's interesting.
Just one other point that in complete naivete, I asked the question, since I'm technically a socialist, why this money that is coming in from a county-wide election was not distributed on a per capita basis rather than going to the sub-districts in which the money was collected, e.g. Lake Oswego, Westland, Wilsonville, et cetera, where the assessed valuation is a multiple of what it is in Oregon City. And the answer was, both from Nick and from Greg, it would never have passed if in fact, you know, Lake Oswego was asked to distribute their money to us rural folk. And so anyway.
And the other thing was that's the way they were paying for their operation of the library out of their general fund. I mean, it's you know, so it's not that the big change was to get support from a broader source, and that was the unincorporated areas. So I think in the past that was always a debate, was, you know, why are the cities supporting beyond, you know, their city borders in a sense, and supporting library patrons. So it was a way to address that. And it's still, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, because I've asked that question. I mean, I've had that thought also and asked that question before about why it doesn't seem equitable. You know, if it worked like high school, you know, or I'm sorry, if it worked like school funding, everything gets pooled and then sent back out to everybody on a per student basis. That seems more
Or sheriff
equitable.
funding, or firefighting funding,
Yeah.
or road maintenance funding, or, I mean, you can look at any other countywide
Yeah.
phenomenon. It's not distributed to the area in which the money was collected.
Right.
But, and
But you also have like Lake Oswego just went through and added they have a supplement for their school district.
Right.
They have an operating measure.
And the other thing about our district is which complicates it even further, and I've said this to a couple of you before, but just for new folks. If you were starting a library district from scratch in Clackamas County, you would not have the libraries where they are right now. As an example, you would not have Oregon City and Westland and Gladstone, 3 branches within a couple of miles of each other.
Right.
You would geographically, move them around. And in the district we have, which you have these existing city libraries, the idea of, that's a very Multnomah County model. And the idea of moving to the Multnomah County model in a county like ours, where there's so much city pride and ownership, that was never, it was always a non-starter. So now if you were able to do that, then yes, it would make a lot more sense to distribute the revenue more per capita, because you would site and size the facilities centrally to be able to accommodate those particular regions, those population areas. But that's not the layout that we have in Clackamas County.
So Nick, when is the next LDAC meeting, and when do you think would be the absolute soonest that there could be an election to go to the voters? I mean, just your.
I'm not even, I mean, it's I wouldn't even fathom a guess, to be honest. Greg, how about you? I mean, it's there's so many factors involved in it, but and it's going to take, I think it's going to take some more understanding about what it really takes to, to put that kind of measure on the ballot, and how much, what kind of documentation you need behind it to be able to support that. And I don't really understand that at this point. Greg, you may have a better feel for it.
I like you. I would not venture a guess. The next step for LDAC that the subcommittee Nick mentioned, my understanding is part of what they're going to do is they're going to reach out to city managers and library boards and kind of ask them, hey, what's important to you going forward? What do we need to work on as we look at the future? I will say that the linked library directors, we've been working on our strategic direction document, which I will bring back to this group once it's a little more finalized. One of the pillars of that is the recognition, at least amongst library directors, that setting the groundwork for a successor district is one of the key strategic things we have to do to be successful and sustainable as a library district. So I believe the directors are doing as much as they can to help advance those conversations. Having conversations in our library board meeting and things like David, going to the city commission, in my opinion, can only help, advance that conversation.
Okay, any other questions about all that?
Well, I could just use some clarification. Why would there be a task force to explicitly allow funds to be used for capital? Is it vague now, or it's not forbidden then?
Well,
There's a question.
That's a better opinion.
I'll go out of my tightrope here. So what I can tell you, and I'm sorry if others are not interested in the history, but to me it's fascinating. When the library district was first conceived of, there was already in existence an a library capital district in Estacada. So the city of Estacada went out and said, hey, we want to build a new library, we want to expand our library. So we are going to set up our own capital district. So it was in existence. State law says you may not have two taxing districts that overlap that are collecting money for the same purpose. And so when the library district was put on the ballot, there was thoughtful intention of presenting it as this is an operations only district to make sure that there was never any legal conflict with that existing Estacada district. Now, as others have talked about, there was talk, and some say there was intent at the time once the Estacada Capital District was defeased and it was no longer in existence, then you could go back and change the library district to explicitly allow capital. That never happened. And as the Clackamas County Council has said in the past, you know, while the influential factor in having that separation no longer exists, the restriction has not been lifted. So if you look at the master order for our library district, it still says, you know, to raise funds for the operation of libraries. And as Nick will attest to, in LDAC, you know, there are many who feel that since that's what the master order says, you know, any use of funds that is not consistent with that is a violation of voter intent and is not right. And so that's when the county comes back and said, so when this was discussed 5 years ago, you know, the thought was put up, hey, let's change the master order because we don't have that legal restriction anymore. So let's change it to explicitly allow the use of funds for capital. That's when there was a huge outcry from many parts of the communities within Clackamas County, and the Board of County Commissioners just said, until you give us better direction through this task force process, we're not going to make any changes.
Well, and we've had different libraries do different things. Like Milwaukee actually went out for a bond measure for their building.
Correct.
And then we have the whole thing with Oak Grove and Gladstone, which is just another whole discussion in itself, and sort of how it got to where it is. But it doesn't really follow. I don't think it follows all the rules either. And they actually set up a separate IGA to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it was in Happy Valley or Westland that is taking $500,000 out and putting it into a capital reserve. So I
Happy
mean,
Valley.
Happy Valley. So
That's Happy Valley has a reserve also. I mean, it's all over the place. So I mean, that's part of the challenge within LDAC is, like I said, there's different. You know, you might have Milwaukee saying, "Why did we do this? If we could have done it a different way." Although they, you know, again, you have to look at it in terms of what it costs them to operate their library, and if they wanted to use the funds from the library district or not. I don't know. I mean, that was really up to them to decide.
I mean, there's just been no issue where these library funds have been used for a non-library purpose.
Yeah.
And so that's when it would get my attention. But this argument about the accounting of capital versus rent just is insane.
And I think I felt good at the tenor of the conversation at LDAC, because I think on some of the members, it finally kind of broke through that, like, we could spend a lot of time litigating this forever, you know, and just discussing this, going round and round and round and round and round, and what's for it, what's not. Or we could spend the same amount of time and energy looking forward. You know, what do we need to do going forward? And then I felt that there was much more interest in, all right, let's kind of look forward and figure out what we need to do to make this district.
And for me, I'll add another thing that part of the some of the challenge to it, I think, are not. I'm not sure if a particular city library is really, if that's totally their position or not. You know, some of it's, I think, because of we have some members that have long history with LDAC and with the whole, with the whole district being set up. So, you know, it's like I said, I think there's other libraries that don't, you know, if we start questioning everything that the way money's being spent, other libraries could be impacted too. And I think they just want to operate the way that they best can operate their libraries with the funding that they have. I don't think they don't really, they're not concerned about how other libraries are spending their funds.
Okay. Foundation.
We did not meet
Meeting tomorrow.
in April. We're meeting tomorrow. But I have a question. I don't know where I should have asked this, but you know, the unincorporated survey that went out,
Yep.
was that a sample survey Or was it to go to everyone in the unincorporated area, just a sample?
Yes,
Okay.
they will send out enough so that they can get, we paid for to get to the 96% statistical.
Right, okay, because somebody asked me about it, I said, I thought it was a sample.
Yes.
It's been such a long time since we discussed it,
Yeah.
but I said I would ask tonight, so.
I received one and sent it back, and my wife found one on Facebook.
Right, I got
It
one.
was pushed on Facebook and she completed it there, so.
Okay. Good. And I did reach out to Jason, our contact at and he said the mail ones, he said they started to come in. And he said as of yesterday, I think they're looking for 300 responses and they had about 44 is what he said. So we're getting there.
Yeah, it just came last week.
Yeah.
All right, the Friends.
We met. There actually were a couple of interesting things that came up. One was, we tend to think of the bookstore as being the Friends. And in fact, they have several revenue streams beyond the bookstore. They've got donations and memberships, bottle drop, which surprised me. They've also got drops.
Probably the blue bags.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Obviously the sale here in the library.
Where's the bottle drop?
Well, you know, when you have cans and you
Yeah.
sell them normally, you can specify who gets to return the money.
You have to have a blue.
Yeah,
blue
they're
bag.
blue bags. I think they have them at the Friends store and it's got like a barcode or a QR code or something and you just scan them.
Okay.
And they used to get money from Amazon, but Amazon has eliminated that program.
Yes.
And with that, they are continuing to contribute. My tongue.
Is that a lion?
They're going to, again, heavily support the summer reading program with gift certificates, books, prizes. And there was also discussion, bookshelves for the children's area. Also discussion of the art display unit and a couch that will come up for actual decision later, but is still being discussed. So they use that money from the 4,000 books they got donated last year or last month for us. It's a great organization.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how good it was until I volunteered to be on to be the liaison.
Yeah, they've had a couple good months recently, like $6,000 and $7,000 in sales just on.
With the addition here or just because of whatever the collection that they have there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're making, I think, over $300 a month from sales here.
Here.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, teens.
Well, I didn't make the last meeting, but I did hear that, yes, summer reading. And one report was that the students wanted books, the kids wanted actual books instead of gift cards, but that was kind of cool that they preferred getting the actual reading material. The students have been invited to be part of several events happening over the summer, the Teen Advisory Committee, in conjunction with the Youth Advisory Committee at the city. So they have some invites and based on basically their availability, not necessarily Sabrina's or the libraries there. It could be included in Juneteenth. There's some celebrations at the college, the First City down here in Main Street. So they've been just invited to bring some of their energy to those events. And the final one is they do still have their small groups. There should be another new newsletter coming out. Along with some of the online offerings that they have. And again, they're very excited about continuing. There was just two that for different reasons, well, we have 2 exchange students that won't be back. And then 2 others that have moved or are graduating, so they won't be back, but the rest of the group will be. So that's good.
One of the things that has occurred to me in the past, and I know staffing would make this impossible, having some presence at the farmer's market. And I'm wondering if that's something that we could have the teams consider. You know, there is a I mean, it would be something interesting to set up to see if people want to sign up for library cards at the farmers. Because it's a pretty vital
Yeah,
little market. And
I
throw it out. as-
no, it's a great idea. I would say, with our new, now that we have a new, our adult services team is back. We have a new, tangent. We have hired a new adult services librarian. He started yesterday. His name is Blake Kincaid. He comes from Fort Vancouver Regional Library, and we're very excited to have him. And one of the things that I have talked to him about is my desire to make sure that when we're looking at adult programming, that we are getting outside the walls of the building, and that I joked, he got full 4 hours of Greg yesterday, as part of his orientation, and some of it was looking at the map, looking at our service area map and just talking about, county survey. Half. And making sure that, the programs that we offer and the services that we offer, that we are being very conscious and making sure they're extending out to the unincorporated portion of our service area. So I think that's a great idea to put on the list of, since the budget got approved, we do have some funds in there for an outreach vehicle, which hopefully the foundation is going to help us fundraise for that. So that makes it easier to do things like that, to show up at those events. Right.
Does the Friends have anything at the farmers market? I thought at one time they did.
They don't presently. Well, I didn't see it presently.
Did you have?
Well, my plug would be there are a number of end of year activities at the different schools, thinking Beaver Creek or Redland. I understand that's not necessarily possible, but the back to school, going out to those schools, they have booths, they have opportunities where I know that they would be, because they've invited other community groups to come out and be part of those events. So just again, making sure that we use the things that are already happening in especially those unincorporated areas.
Yes, and I think with our our additional staffing that we're going to get, we know we're going to have some additional support in youth services. So part of what we want to do with those youth services staff is to make sure that we have an improved presence at those events.
That's all right. Anything else for the good of the order? No. Then I will adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.